Ryan, are you happy to start?
We are. Go for it.
Ready to go?
All right. So welcome everyone to our March Sensei's Ask an Expert webinar. Today our topic is keep your work focused and on track with the new Altus project prioritization. Next, please, Kirk. So just a few housekeeping before we begin. If you could please remain on mute throughout the presentation, unless you're asking a question, that would be much appreciated. If you are asking a question, however, please use your raise your hand tool or just use the chat function there. We will be having a Q&A session at the end. Next, please. So our panel today is Ryan Darby and Kirk McBean. This is actually Kirk's first time in a webinar session. So I'm going to pass over to Kirk to introduce himself a little bit to you guys. Thanks,
Sure,
Kirk.
Thanks very much, Ali. And yeah, very excited to be here. And yeah, just as a quick introduction, I'm a consultant here at Sensei. I get to talk to clients about bringing their portfolio delivery every day, so best job ever. My background, just prior to Sensei, I had the opportunity to establish and manage an enterprise portfolio at an ASX 200 company, which was a really interesting experience, and I've got some learnings from that that I'm hoping to share with you today. And prior to that, also just being involved in project management and just general management, business analysis for quite some time. And joined, of course, by the incredible Ryan Darby, who likewise has a lot of experience in this space. I think Ryan, we've kind of both been in the trenches a bit.
Yep.
So yeah, keen to share some perspective, our perspective.
Thank you is back. You've still got your hair. I unfortunately lost mine along the way, but it just shows you obviously be successful at this. So Kirk is going to kick off and just talk us through a bit of agenda and some of the background behind prioritization and why it's really important. So take it away, Kirk.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. Some hair anyway. I did get rid of the beard at one point. All right, team. So the agenda. The sort of 4 key areas we'll talk about today. Why is prioritization important? We kind of want to dig into that one a little bit, that question. How do I establish a foundation or ensure I have the right foundation? How does Altus enable you to prioritize? So Ryan will do a bit of a demo, and then your first step. That was actually out of a question that was asked leading into this, a great question. So we'll share some thoughts on that. So to start with, I really want to start with my absolute favorite quote of all time. I nicked this from one of my old bosses, but he nicked it from Denzel Washington, so I don't feel so bad. The quote is, "Don't confuse movement with progress." And it makes intuitive sense. You know, we can think about it in our own lives. Sometimes it feels like we're working hard and investing in a lot of effort, but it feels like we're not moving forward because we've got a lot of movement and not a lot of progress. And when we look at our organizations as well, so here's some information from PMI. It's a couple of years old now, but I think it still probably broadly applies. 75% of projects are poorly aligned with strategic business priorities. So that's what people, all of us in this community, said about our organizations to the PMI. And some of the key challenges that were identified by that large group of project managers and portfolio managers: saying no to new projects that come up, aligning the difficulty in aligning projects with corporate strategy, and accurately scoring project value as challenges. And so a lot of movement. And here's another interesting one. 1 in 3 failed projects is linked to poor prioritization or lack of strategic alignment. And that one comes from a standards group. They're talking about IT projects in particular, but I wouldn't be surprised if that applies much more broadly. So one of the reasons why I think this really is inspiring for me is the fact that, you know, we've got a significant amount of value that unfortunately our organizations aren't getting. And that's because we're not making optimal prioritization decisions. And if we could just unlock a little bit of that, that would be, you know, billions of dollars worth of value generated. So that's what I find really inspiring about this, and I hope you share that, because we all are in a unique position to enable this, you know, for our organizations, but for our society as well. So it's an exciting area. But before we really get into prioritization, let's talk about strategy. And here's something that I got from Playing to Win. It's an interesting book. It talks about Procter & Gamble's approach, but they've broken down strategy into sort of 5 high-level areas which is helpful because it's obviously such a complex area. So first question for us in our organizations, what is our winning aspiration? What do we aspire to do? Why do we exist? What's our purpose as an organization? Where will we play? And how will we win? Now, these obviously are really deep areas, and we're not going to cover them in the presentation today. We're talking about the next bit, strategic execution. So let's talk about the next two boxes. What capabilities must be in place in order to achieve that strategy, and what management systems are required? So when we look at those two boxes and what's required then for strategic execution, a few things. So we want to foster promising ideas. We can have the best prioritization in the world, but if we don't have a lot of good ideas, we're not going to get a good output. So we need to create the environment in our organizations as much as we can where we're fostering the creation of ideas and collecting them. The second thing, key focus today, then prioritizing them in a way that there's a lot of words on the screen, but really what we're saying is we want to pick the things most likely to provide the best return on investment. And when we say return, it's not necessarily financial, right? We might have a nonprofit and we can measure the amount of social good that we can create as a result of the investment. So it's just strategically aligned value that we want to deliver. And then, of course, we can pick the right projects, but if we don't deliver them effectively, we're not going to get the value. And the fourth one is then tweaking and optimizing our model based on what actually happens. So the real data that then comes out of delivering these initiatives. Now, I want to share some experiences that I had, 4 key challenges that we ran into, and just a few thoughts on how to potentially overcome them. First challenge was executive support was a challenge. And it can be really frustrating, and some of you may be nodding along with this because, what we do is we manage the strategic execution. We're here to execute the company or organizational strategy. But sometimes it feels like there's a rift between, the formulation of the strategy and the executive and what we do in executing it. And, if you're pitching, for example, we need a portfolio, we need an enterprise portfolio, here's the benefits. It can be hard to gain executive support. One thing I tried that didn't work was to talk about best practice. So, we can get the executives in a room and we can talk about best practice. PMI says we should do this. PMI or Axelos, has these guidelines, and here's how we make a really effective portfolio. But I had the fortune of quite a outspoken executive. Basically says, we've heard it all before. Heard it all before. Not interested. And I think best practice can be something that's really inspiring for us when we're building the systems and we're building the processes in our organizations. Helps us to, think about all the components that need to be included. But in my experience, it hasn't gone well trying to sell it to the executive. You might have a different experience, but that was mine. So I tried different approaches, and one thing that I think worked well had two parts. So the first thing is figuring out how can we get them value right away. And then the second thing is sort of nudging them forward to make it their idea instead of our idea. One of the organizations I was in, we had 2 problems. First problem is that we get to Q4 and we'd go, what projects are we going to do next year? It was almost like we were in a coma and we just woke up and went, what projects are we going to do? We need to work out what our portfolio is going to be next year because we need to create a budget. So we have this mad scramble. And that was interesting because a lot of the initiatives are multi-year. Transformation, if we just think 1 year at a time, can be really difficult. So that was one problem. We had this just 1 year at a time view. And the other challenge was we had strategic goals, but they weren't really quantified. And it was really difficult to tie projects to them. So what did I do? Well, I thought, I'll make them a report. They didn't ask for it, but how's this report? So along the top, year 1, year 2, year 3. So we get our multi-year. Along the rows, strategic goals. So I said, I'm not sure that these are the right strategic goals, but I figured these might be the right strategic goals based on, what you've communicated. And then I put all the projects in. And then talked a little bit about the key outcomes. Hey, we want to penetrate a new market. Based on these initiatives over the next 3 years, here's our forecast. And what it also can do is then identify a problem. We got this carbon neutral goal, but we don't have any ideas for year 2 and year 3. And before, that never would have really been a consideration because we're only talking 1 year at a time. So then, take it away and go, oh, that's interesting. Give them something valuable. They could even pull this up and talk to, the stakeholders or the shareholders about it. So it helped them to think about it in a new way. And then you can see then the wheels turning, and then they'll come back to you and sort of present it as kind of their idea. And that's fine, because the point is, it's just helping us nudge the company in the right direction to help them prioritize better, get better outcomes. So that's something that I found helpful. Next challenge is too many objectives. Sometimes it feels like our organizations, it's almost like we're going to go to the Olympics as a single athlete and win every event. We got to have the best customer experience. We're going to have the lowest prices. We're going to have the most sustainable supply chain. We're going to have the strongest cybersecurity. We're going to be good at everything. And sometimes maybe we need to tell the market this. But of course, behind the scenes, we've got our business model, particularly if we're talking private sector. We've got our business model. And there's specific things we need to do to achieve the best results within that business model. But they may not be communicated, or we may communicate too many objectives. And that's really hard for those of us on the ground to work out, how do I prioritize? There's too many options. There's too many things that compete against each other. Here's a great quote that I found the other day. This is from Mark Markula, who was instrumental in the early days of Apple Computer. And there's the old Apple II, if anyone remembers those. And what he said was, more wood behind fewer arrows. I have to look that up. It's more wood means a stronger bow. So we want to have fewer arrows, but a stronger bow. And I like to think about that in my personal life. And I think it can be helpful for organizations. And then John Doerr, who wrote an sort of an influential book on OKRs, suggested 3 to 5 high-impact objectives at any given time. Of course, if your organization is very large and complicated, then it might be by different business units. But I think within the unit we're working, it's really helpful to have a set of clear goals that help us make decisions. And to that end, transparency, I think, can be really helpful in how we prioritize. So if we have our criteria and we tell everybody, the executives, the executive shares, here's how we prioritize. Here's, guys, here's really what we need to do to be successful. These 3 things, these 3 to 5 things. What makes it easy is then general managers and others in the organization who have project ideas know how they're going to be scored anyway. Tell everyone the scoring criteria, because you're going to write business cases that more align with your organizational objectives. Everybody, even just your average employees, 70% more likely to focus on high priority tasks when they understand the goal. That's kind of obvious when you say it out loud, but sometimes it's opaque. That makes it difficult. If everyone knows the goal, it's easier to write a business case. It's easier to prioritize. It's easier to approve. It's easier for everybody. All the arguments happen up front to figure out what that criteria is. And then the fourth one, maybe the hardest, value not tracked. And I got to tell you on this one, what I think of is, imagine if I told you I have found the perfect approach to prioritize picking shares for my investment portfolio. I have the perfect approach. What's your first question? What's your return on investment? Right? How's your portfolio doing? I say, well, I don't know. I don't measure that. It's comical. So when we talk about prioritizing, obviously, we need to know how successful are the initiatives and what we prioritize them for. This is hard. So I'm not meaning to suggest that any of these things are easy to do. This is difficult. And there's a few key points, right? The business case. What impact will this initiative have on our strategic targets? Quantified if we can. Sometimes we feel like, I can't quantify it. It's too hard. It's customer experience. It's too hard. But I think we really need to dig deep and figure out how to do this. And as an example, an organization I was working in had a strategic priority around recurring revenue. And I was working with a GM who was creating a customer success business unit. And it was really a fledgling business unit. They had only a few customer success managers.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, just mic on. It's okay. So, yeah, customer success initiative. And We were trying to figure out how to tie it to something that was strategically important because we knew it was there. It was just the process of finding it. But what we found is that customers who had a customer success manager were much more likely to renew their contracts. Seems obvious. So we could then tie it to recurring revenue and felt, obviously we have more customer success managers working with people. We're going to have more contract renewals, which is going to improve our recurring revenue. So it sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but it took us a long time to come to that conclusion. And sometimes it's just really working through it and looking at the data. You can be a scientist and try and have hypotheses and try and figure out, what levers can this initiative pull that impact us in a strategic way. And you might actually subtly shift what you're proposing to do in the business case. But I think this is really helpful. Then when it comes to the next stage, so delivery, is this what we're doing still? We're delivering the project. Is it still helping us achieve our strategic goal? Because the market can change, and our vendors may change, and other things may change that impact it. And usually, you may stop some initiatives, but I think often it's just subtly changing approach a little bit to better match the ongoing situation. Worst thing to do is just to not pay attention to it because the project's in delivery. It's better just to make sure it still makes sense and tweak if you need to. And then the third one is then the project's done, it's in operations. Is it impacting our strategic targets as predicted? A lot of us do benefits management, which is a difficult area, but there's some ways to do that more easily. But there's two sides to it. We have to track benefits, and a lot of us track benefits. But I know a lot of organizations don't track the costs that are associated with the projects that they just delivered. And I think that gives you a really skewed view of return on investment. So we need to track all the ongoing costs. If we create a new business unit, what about all the costs for the staff running that business unit? What about the cost for the software that business unit needs and the other tools? We've got to track that just at the same time as we got to track the revenue that business unit produces. So just an important thing to consider. And then finally, a feedback loop. So that as we're tracking what's happening, we want to go back and refine our whole process and refine our prioritization criteria to make sure we're getting the best value. So here we are. Let's zoom out. Here's our foundation. We have strong executive support. We've got, hopefully, at least in our business unit, 3 to 5 high impact objectives that everybody knows and the value is tracked. And we want to take a minute just to ask you about your organization. If there's an area that's maybe less mature among these 4, or if you feel your organization is doing all 4 really well. So I'll stop for a moment and just keen to see what you think. And I'll share the results. It should pop up on your screen. And I think we give it just a minute. Value tracking is definitely the one that's coming to the forefront. It's not a surprise because really, when you think about it, how far you go down into benefits management, you may end up spending more money tracking benefits than you spent on the project in the first place. So this is hard to do well, but there are techniques to do it. Second, so value tracking is more than half of the respondents, and thanks everybody for responding so far. Executive support is number 2. Totally get it. Having those 3 to 5 high impact objectives is the next one, and transparency is the final one. And we do have one respondent who's mature at all 4. And congratulations, I think that's a difficult place to get to. All right. Well, we might move on now into the next slide. Thanks again, everybody, for responding to that. There's our poll. And now I'm just going to talk quickly about prioritization criteria, and then I'm going to hand over to Ryan to give you a look at Altus. Now for this, I'm going to bring best practice back. Altus has something called management of portfolios, which you may have seen, and they've given sort of 5 tips in how you set prioritization criteria. So now we assume we've got our foundation. How are we going to set our criteria? The first suggestion is multi-criteria analysis, and you might be doing this already. This is quite common, and it's very intuitive, which makes it easy for everyone to understand. Basically, we want to set a series of criteria that are weighted. So we have, how strategically aligned is this? How strong is the financial benefit? And so on. Some are positive and some are negative. And then we want to have a rating in each one. So here I've got, for example, under strategic alignment, for each initiative, we might assess, okay, this initiative supports achievement of 3 objectives. This initiative is just 1. You go through, you do a weighting, and you get a score. So this is a recommended approach for management of portfolios. And I think Ryan will show you a little bit more about that later. But when you actually set these criteria, how do I pick them? So here's the next bit. What management of portfolio suggests is three things. So as you create measures, you should have representation of each one of these multiples potentially. First one is risk and achievability. So how risky is the project? How achievable is it really? What's your likelihood of success? It could be around reputational risk, technical risk, and so on. So these detract from our score, right? Because these provide a lower score, the higher those ones are. Then we have return and desirability. So, what are the benefits? Financial return, political need, strategic objectives. And then the third one is the scale of investment. So it's good to know, if it's a very expensive project, we need to take that into consideration as to smaller investment required versus the benefits and risks. The third recommendation is to involve the management board. What do we mean by management board? So this would be more around your portfolio board. So the executives that are directing the portfolio. So involving them in coming up with the criteria. And one way to do this is through a decision conference, because this is quite difficult. We'll share the slides at the end. There's a link here to a paper that talks about how to do this. I think it's quite good. So it's probably worth a read. And then the fourth one, use evidence-based assessments. So we're coming up with our criteria. What can we do? Well, you might have done this already, but test it on your old projects you already did. Does the score make sense? Try different experiments. Try extremes in different areas and see, does it still make sense? Would we still trust it? And then provide confidence to your stakeholders that it is a level playing field. It's so important. It can't be biased, right? This has to be a level playing field in the context of achieving our strategic goals. The very fifth one is around being creative and presenting the findings. There's so many different ways to visualize it. You can put this on a page. The executives can share it with the organization in an interesting way. So just a few ideas on there. So I hope this helps us all think. How can we progress? Not just movement, but how do we progress? So I'm going to hand over without further ado to Ryan, who will give us just a look at how we can do this in Altus. Take it away, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Kirk. That was really great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build on what you have been saying. So you take people through a really good sort of journey as to what to think about. What they can physically now use is coming out in Altus now, essentially. So ta-da, you are seeing a sneak peek first view of prioritization within Altus. You're part of the chosen 54 people who are getting this view. This will be rolled out shortly for those of you who are Altus clients and who have the strategy layer, but I will talk a bit more about that as we go forward. So what I'm showing you here is one of the things that Kirk has just shown is the way to visualize this. So we're starting sort of at the end result here. We need to have something that's visual. We need to have something that is intuitive, people can actually understand. So let's actually see what we're seeing on the screen. I'll then work backwards and I'll show you where all this comes from and in the system take you through the same journey that Kirk has just taken you through on the slides. So what we have here is a particular prioritization model. There may be multiple. Kirk had pointed out that depending on your organization, you may have one for the whole organization. You may have one per department. You may need to create one just to get a bit of perspective on something. It's new financial year. We've got some new ideas coming through. Let's just kind of kick some ideas around, okay? So first of all, we are able to include initiatives, and that's purposely called initiatives because they're not only projects. We can have projects, we could have proposals like business cases, maybe even before that, there are ideas coming in. Haven't even turned it into a business case, or maybe it's not necessary to create a business case for this, but we want to get this on the list. Now, so got to be very inclusive. We want a prioritization worked out for us. We also want the system to be very clear where we're missing data. Okay, so we have missing data over here. Now, what have we got here? If we think about this, a lot of you who are not doing this on the system or are doing it sort of the manual way are doing it in Excel. We've made sure that we align to a way that is familiar with most people and a way that most people actually work. A lot of research has been done into different options, and we did actually have some discussions around, do we take you through the theory behind different ways of doing prioritization? But no, look, intuitively, people tend to do it a particular way, and Altus has taken that intuitive approach. So we have all of our initiatives, but we are rating them against their contribution towards particular criteria, as Kirk called them. Now, he'd also pointed out that you have positive and negative. Some things improve something, some things take something away or essentially make it worse, depending on which direction you're looking at it from. So therefore, we have both the green and the red. So here we are saving money. It's a good thing. But where we are dealing with, for example, implementation, feasibility, it's like, well, this is actually, we perceive this as a negative thing. So it's hard to actually implement. We want overall the prioritization to be taking into account both the positive and the negative, the sort of contributors and the detractors in terms of this. So this again gives us a very flexible and realistic model. Now, as we work within this, there are a few things we can do. If I just put my mouse over that, it does. This is an introduction as well to some new things in Altus around giving you some more feedback onto what you're actually doing, or helping you figure some things out, how to do it. So we're able to actually see the detail of what's behind it, but we're also able to see the detail of how this is calculated. Now, within Altus, you'll start seeing these little information circles coming up. Some are pictures and links like this one is. Some have videos included. We'll look at a few of them as we go. So this is actually explaining how the prioritization works. So we have our positive criteria and negative criteria. And what it's explaining is that these are subtracted, and that gives us that prioritization overall. But we know to get this, there's going to be some setup. So if I'm a user, I'm the people that Kirk was talking about, you've got to communicate to people. So they're seeing this. I'm those executives that are hard to sort of convince on this, or I'm just people within the organization who need to have a shared understanding. They're able to see this. Depending on your role, you may start saying, well, at this point, I'm actually going to start filling in missing information here. So I'm actually able to do that. If I have a lot, the screen gets really full, I can go to a full screen mode as well. So it becomes quite easy to actually work with. But I could also say, Kirk walks in and he says, hey, this is the IT guys you're talking about here. That's like no problem. But I've just come from a meeting with the marketing people. They've got a whole different take on the world. They've got to do things differently. Like, okay, cool. Let's just check that out quickly. So we can switch models. And this is what the marketing people want to do. And this is what they see as important to them. The criteria can actually change, and they've got a different view of things. So what we have here is a system where I can create different models. I can add different types of initiatives in. I can switch between these. So it becomes very flexible. It's not a, you shall all do it this way only, or we finally got those executives to focus on this and give us some direction, and you're all doing it their way. There are 10,000 people in this large organization, and for some of them, we are actually, some departments or teams, we need to do our own thing a little bit as well. So we have flexibility to actually do that. So I'm able to go and create all my models, but I am creating the models or the prioritizations within the context of, you can add your work on, no problem, but so far there's no option for me, let's call me the end user in terms of this. I'm not choosing my individual criteria. This is coming from somewhere where it's been defined before. So it's a flexible approach, but it's not a free-for-all. There has to be some control and some thought as to what is important for the organization. So let's actually look at where this comes from. So we're now going to jump to the other end of this, and we're going to look inside a project. Now, a few things, you'll see that little sort of like slowly pulsing blue dot there. This is something new that has turned up in Altus. And we have a project over here, the good old AA tenant renewal project. You've seen demos all over the place. And we now have an evaluation tab. So from the angle of the project, as opposed to over here, which you could do it from either direction, we are able to rate this initiative, which happens to be a project, in terms of its contribution towards these criteria. Now here you can see there are 3 customer-centric criteria. So this is a grouping. So these are able to be grouped up. So it's not just a random list of all these things. We have the financial ones grouped. There's one risk one. There's one strategic environment one, etc. And here we can start to select. So this starts bringing us to the next part of the discussion is, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over there. How do I define those? So here they've actually just defined as none, low, medium, etc. if I look at this, there's a bit more detail provided. So part of our model is, it's essentially, if you imagine your spreadsheet, you click on a cell and the drop list comes in and you've defined something specific. So we need the flexibility to be able to define and describe what those are, and then start relating these against each other so that they're used in the prioritization. So the prioritization is taking into account, you've defined the criteria, you have related the criteria in terms of relative importance to each other. So now you're describing the strategic goals, really, and how they should be implemented. And now prioritization just finishes that off, works out that final calculation for you. So where does this come from? So now we're going to change hats here, and we're going right behind the scenes where the admins or the PMO would set this up. So Kirk used the example, a very common one. I suspect a lot of people, given it's March now, are going through this. Financial year's coming. Oh no, we better figure out what we're going to do next. Let's go and recreate a brand new spreadsheet because we forgot last year's one, and prioritize everything. So how about, instead of recreating that wheel every year, we have a system that lets us actually do this, and that system is reflecting our themes, our goals, our criteria. It's a standard list that we can work from. So the standard list is in the settings area. So a little blue dot over there again, telling you something new is in here, and there's a new strategy area. So this is a bit of detail we're going into, but I'm showing you this because a lot of people on this call are PMO people who actually think about and set the stuff up in a spreadsheet. So where it really starts is, we can define the values of those drop lists, and we can then create their relative importance. Okay, we can also define what type of work or initiatives we're going to allow, projects, proposals, ideas, or we're going to allow something else in. It's a very inclusive system. So we start out our the very smallest part of our model, and we start building up from this point. So the next thing we need to do is we need to think about those groupings. Okay, so we're going to create a bunch of groupings over here. So one that we'd seen the customer-centric one over there. So if we look at this, we can now go and introduce a bunch of criteria to that. So now I'm like, okay, so these are all customer-centric ones. Let's actually, and let's say order some more information here. Okay, and we've got a video in this case that we can actually watch. It explains to us where this is used. So these are sequenced, and it's not random. It's sequenced out in a way you get to control. So you will find useful information everywhere now. If we then look at a particular criteria, we can also see where it's been used in different models. We've turned them on and off. So this one is still active, or is active. We go and we look at it and say, okay, it has, in terms of our drop list, there are 4. I see a hand just come up, Andrew. I'm just going to kind of run to the end of the thinking here, and I'll come to you. So we can actually define that, and we can define the relative importance of these, and we get to see some information and a video again, so how all this ties together. All of this is then ultimately used in a prioritization model. So we've built from the bottom, we're building this up, and there's our IT model. We need to define what the model is, and within that model, the relative weighting of these. This then gives us everything we need to create that prioritization. So I'm going to pause at this point. Andrew's got his hand up. Andrew, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Thank you. I think you might have already answered my question just then, but so essentially these different categories, for example, you've got cost savings as a category, and you've got evaluation criteria, maybe, for example, 5 items under cost savings. You can then essentially weight cost savings. Say it had a really high weighting, you can weight that criteria higher than, for example, revenue growth.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So it gives us what's,
And I was just going to say, does it overall, does it provide is it a score is it always out of 100, or how does the sort of overall scoring work across all your, say you've got 10 categories or 5 categories, or is it just flexible?
So essentially we can watch the video on that, which will take us through it, but we won't do that for now. But essentially it is going to be, we add all that up, that's not 100. You find it's not, it's a weighted approach. So it becomes flexible.
Yeah, it's flexible. It is flexible. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So the person who's chipped in over there is Mark, who heads up the Altus area. So what you'll find throughout the entire system is we're trying not to constrain you to particular ways to do things. So everything, they've taken on the complexity to make sure that it actually becomes flexible.
Yep. Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so what this ultimately then gives us is, so we set this up, and this then means we can now use this model. So the model is, well, it's a model. It's the foundational starting point to say, okay, I'm now going to look at those initiatives, and I want to work out the prioritized ranking of those initiatives based on how they contribute to my criteria and how my criteria then are weighted against each other. So we've shown you the bottom-up setup to do that. So if I go into this one, which is where we had started, it takes us to the next tab, and there we have our actual prioritization model. Remember, we can create multiple of these. So if I look at them, what I've got here is a heap of them. You know, there were more this morning. We deleted a few out. But hey, what do the marketing people think? They think they have a different way of doing things. So I can actually see what is going on. You'll find here what is quite nice with this now. Altus is going to introduce in sort of feedback. You will get, hey, something has happened behind the scenes. Someone like me has gone in and changed the weighting, etc. So maybe your scores changed. It's warning you about that. You should have a look at it. It is also going to, when you go in, there will be some of them where it will give you, and we did a very good job of cleaning it up, so I may have removed this. Yeah. Okay, what I wanted to show you, it will actually bring up red lines here as well, giving you some guidance to say, hey, you are trying to do something, but you have not set enough of it up. So it'll actually give you some warning in terms of that. So this was just to give you a bit of a sneak peek of what is coming in terms of Altus. This will start rolling out depending on the release ring you're in, over the next month or so. This will roll out to everyone. What we're going to do is we're going to get, Kirk is going to share the slides again, and we're going to talk you through a couple of things. One is going to be like, okay, so you've got this. What's your next step? What do you physically do to start solving this problem? And then after that, we're going to talk about a bit of some detail about how Sensei is positioned to help you on that. So Kirk, go for it. You're on mute.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, I want to thank the person who wrote in this question. You know, what's the first step? And it's difficult because every organization is going to be in a different position. So Ryan and I kind of racked our brains, you know, what might be a good place to start? So what we thought was, you know, what is one significant problem or opportunity in your organization that's connected with executing its strategy, where improved prioritization could radically transform the business? So really, we want to find an interesting problem and then provide value straight away. So can you provide an interesting view of it? So highlight, we've got this problem, but there's an opportunity. So just, I know that's quite high level, but if you're sort of starting down this journey, you can demonstrate in an interesting way that there is a path. And part of that path is prioritizing better. All right, might head back to you, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, if you are getting this and you're thinking, okay, I've got two things to consider now. One is I need to actually engage with those executives. I need to figure out internally what I'm going to do next. What you are able to do is get some help from Sensei on it. So from the concepts and the process you need to think about, but also how do I use this new feature that just turned up? How do I get the most value out of it? So how can I showcase it? How can I go through a series of workshops to actually figure out what those goals are and how we can start getting from executive influence all the way down to prioritized work and through to people doing something about it? How can we actually do it? And how can we figure out some of the details? So Sensei has a consulting offer. It's a fixed price offer that can help you get started on this. Go to the next slide, please. So it will give you some exposure to this, help you understand what's behind it, and will give you advice on the solutions, the best practices, as much as, we don't want to go and sell best practices to people. As we have learned from this, it's really about helping you, supporting you in that close collaboration to get this worked out. So you've got a framework to define and measure success over the next 6 to 12 months. So get you through this financial year and set you up properly for the next year as well. So if you're interested, if you want to just know more about this, or you are interested in this offer to get you going, really, talk to your account manager. So for those the Sensei clients on the call, which is most of you, talk to your account manager. They will more than happily get you set up with this. Okay, now we did get quite a few questions, and your account managers will get back to a lot of you on these questions. But what Kirk and I are going to do is just kind of go through and discuss some of these together. So I'm going to sort of, I think, I'll start and answer the first one. So someone has sent one in. Can the criteria, and you've seen how they're physically set up and what they are, can they include financials such as a rate of return as well as strategic other considerations? The answer is yes. So you're able to create and define those criteria in any way that you need to. So you can create individual criteria, you can determine how they are measured and what their impact is, and they can be positive and negative as well. So this gives you a way, without needing to sit and write formulas in Excel, a way to get all the same type of power and flexibility. Now, Kirk, you've just sort of spoken about, you did mention at different departments. The second one, what do you think? Different prioritization models?
Yeah, great question. And I think what Ryan showed us a little bit is how we can have different prioritization models, and they can be specific to different departments, or even you could have within a department 2 different views. So can we incorporate multiple methods? Yes, you can through Altus. And I think it's a good idea to get a broader perspective on the different initiatives that you have. So hopefully that gives you an answer on that one. Number 3, Ryan, I can't answer an AI question. You need to answer the AI question.
I will definitely answer an AI question. That's my world. Now, Kirk is actually quite into AI himself. I've got to give credit for that. But so what you need to, so short answer is, can AI be used to optimize a portfolio? Yes, it can. There are many other non-AI ways that can help you optimize. This is a sneak peek into what's coming. So optimization is something that Altus is working on now. There are various steps to go through to get there. This will be the next piece coming through. So in terms of cost base, resource base, and then later on AI, etc., absolutely wait for chapter 2 in terms of that. There is some very good stuff coming down. Because they're still working away on this, didn't want to start exposing some of that stuff today, but it's absolutely coming through. Okay. Now, question 4 is really, Kirk, you're taking people through the criteria concept. Okay. Do you see these as just criteria? So achievability, but mandatory as well. It's almost like it's not a criteria, but it's like you have to force in that project. Now, have you seen that, and how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a good one as well. I think when it comes to achievability, it could be risk of failure or risk of fully achieving, which would be, I suppose, a detractor for our score potentially. If it's higher risk, but there's a lower chance we'll achieve it, I would see it, potentially create a detractor in the model. And then mandatory is an interesting one, because if you have a project that's mandatory, my understanding of that is it wouldn't need to be prioritized, because it must be prioritized. So it depends on if you want to flag it as such, or if mandatory, there's degrees of mandatory. I might stop, Andrew, if you have some thoughts on that one.
I see mandatory as more of an optimization issue, which I know that they are looking at as part of that. You don't have to prioritize it, but you have to include it in the optimization. Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, particularly just around that mandatory status. That's an interesting one. One of the things that we sometimes have, you might prioritize all your projects based on a lot of different set criteria, how ready it is, whether it has a return on investment, et cetera, et cetera. But then a political decision might be made that a project has to be funded, and you want to be able to show this project scored really low, so it wasn't a priority, but it's mandatory. So that's where I think we still need to do prioritization, but we need the flexibility to be able to force it in with some sort of tick box. And that's where I see this being really useful.
So this is something that is coming once the optimization part is looked at.
Ryan,
Yeah.
can we just touch? Can we just touch quickly on the other part
Yeah.
here, just around achievability? Because some of in that question might be, how do I know I have enough resources to deliver my top priority projects? How do I know I have enough budget to deliver, our top priority projects? And again, that comes into the optimization piece as well, where we then start to take a look at our constraints and factor in more constraints. At this stage through prioritization, you can put things like that in as detractors or benefits. But to give you a sort of a much more fine-grained view of that, I think that's an area that Altus is exploring at the moment.
I'm going to group 5 and 6 together, and that essentially 5 is how does prioritization reflect up in the strategic platform. So the prioritization is part of the strategy module within Altus. So think of it as themes, goals. We're now starting to think about benefits from there and the criteria. It all ties together. So they've got a sort of integrated approach. And then the question really is 6. I think we've sort of covered this already, is does one enterprise criteria work across a diverse portfolio? Doesn't have to. Have multiple. So you can have multiple models. You have the flexibility. It's not that we are forcing you to have only one approach for this. So instead of everyone creating their own spreadsheet, you are able to, in a more controlled way, do this within Altus. Number 7, the licensing. I'm going to leave that. If you have a question around licensing, you will either have, if you have the strategy module, the strategy layer of Altus, this will be included as part of that. If you do not, your account managers can definitely help you there. There's a lot of focus on new functionality coming out in terms of that. Have a chat to your account manager. They are the ones who can fix you up there. It is done. Strategy is a layer of its own. So you've got a project layer, you've got a portfolio layer, which includes programs and the intake funnel, and then you've got a strategy layer on top of that. Now, number 8, method of prioritization. Can this be manually overridden? Okay, that's an interesting one. Kirk, I'm not going to chuck that one to you because I'm dealing with it. I'm not sharing the screen, am I? So again, short answer is no. There is no on the screen, and Alex will jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't manually override that as you go through, not in that way. It's something that is calculated and fed up, and in that way, you don't end up sort of devolving back into just a free-for-all in a spreadsheet. There is science behind the way that you are actually doing this, and you can keep a record of the science behind that.
One thing just to add, maybe, Ryan, is that the intent is to add an option for you, an arrow in your quiver. So obviously, the actual prioritization, the actual approval of the project to proceed, isn't enforced by the prioritization. It's to provide a view for you, and then that decision-making and approval process can happen separately.
I think that's definitely worth pointing out. The act of prioritization and the engagement with people in prioritization is actually far more important than the end result, and because it will lead to that shared understanding. Mark, who's part of the Altus team, has got his hands up.
Yeah, just very quickly, Kirk, you hit it right on the spot. The prioritization is really only an indication of the value in regards to the evaluation that we have against the strategic goal. It does not mean that you want to implement it that way. The next step that Altus is working on right now is the optimization. And as part of the optimization, that's where you actually manage the constraints. And that's where you can then determine which initiatives you believe should be in and out. So that is coming next.
Well, okay. So question 9 was around the essentially what's out of the box. I think we've shown you that. But Kirk, maybe answer it together. So what is the common framework recommended or included in Altus? Would you sound correct in saying that it's the weighted average approach? There are many ways you can do it, but without becoming academics, this is a good way. I don't know if you've seen any others that are sort of in use out in the wild.
Yeah, I think this is the one that I've seen the most, and probably for good reason. But if you read your corporate finance textbook, it'll say things like NPV, which is really a useful way of looking at financial return on a project, and it's a great tool. But that may be one of the criteria in a weighted approach. So again, I guess going back to it's intuitive. If we were to build, an algorithm that that produces the ultimate portfolio for you, but nobody understands it because it all happens in a black box, I don't think it'll be effective, even if the result is better, because we want to understand it, right? And the executives and your GMs and everyone in your business need to understand how the decision was made. So I believe the Altus team settled on this approach because it's intuitive, because it's best practice, it's widely done. So and it's shown to be effective.
And you can see, you change something, you can see the result. We have had systems from Microsoft in the past who are effectively, you need a PhD in some hard stuff to be able to figure it out. And I would be in workshops with clients and get the question on, show me how the maths works. I'm like, I lack that PhD. I cannot do it. This is a very simple way to actually do it, and it's effective. And as Mark and Kirk have said, instead of focusing on the ultimate prioritization model, focus on the act and process of prioritization and optimization. If you are 80% correct, you are going to get a massive amount of value, as opposed to where most people are in the world are now. They are doing nothing and they're getting no value. So you're better off getting close, even if you don't get all the way there. Okay, so the next 3 questions are around step 1. I think you've given a very good insight into that. Prioritization model, we've just covered off. Specific challenges. Kirk, do you want to just sort of reiterate the 4 challenges you went through? Because I think this really directly answers that question.
Yeah, sure, Ryan. So I guess going back earlier, challenges that I faced, and there's a number of challenges, but many people on this call, I think it resonated many of those things. So actually, if we look at the survey results, number 1 was tracking the value of projects, so effective benefits tracking and cost tracking, executive support, gaining support from the executive, and good communication down, transparent communication about an achievable and understandable set of objectives. So I think those are some of the challenges in prioritizing projects. And we hope this tool will help organizations with providing a really easy way for executives to see and consume the information, providing a way to filter it down into an achievable set of objectives. And then, of course, in the base product, many people on this call may already be using some of the benefits tracking features that already exist in the strategy module. So those are how we hope to help you in your organizations in this area.
That does sort of segue us into the last question: is will Altus prioritization be able to capture enterprise strategic goals? Yes, because Altus prioritization and optimization and other things in future is part of the strategy layer, and that is all about your themes, your goals, your benefits, etc. So this is one puzzle piece, very important one, such a cog really, and amongst a lot of different puzzle pieces that helps you define and keep a focus on your strategy overall. So this is the end of the sort of formal part of this. We have some minutes left. Does anyone else want to put a question into the chat? Alex, thanks for dealing with those. Or just unmute yourself and ask a question. If not, you will be getting this, as I've said, over depending on the release cycle you're on and depending on the environment you're using. If you have the strategy layer, you will be getting this coming out to you very shortly. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we are able to give you some help with this. And as we had said, we do have an offer that can help you with that. Andrew, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. What's the sort of high-level timeline for optimization following all of this?
This I cannot comment on yet. I think we'll have to wait. Mark's unmuted himself, so on behalf of Altus, he can comment, or we wait for them to work it out officially. Mark, go for it.
I was probably just referring it to Alex, actually.
Yeah,
Alex is the product manager.
I'm happy to reply on this one. We are aiming for the end of the first half, so mid 2025 for the very first version of optimization. If you are really interested in it, we'll be doing some user testing along the way before we release it. We may also have some pre-release. If you are interested in giving us some more insights or interested to participate in those user interviews and testing of the pre-release, please just put a comment on I put a link in the chat of the roadmap card that you can go to on and vote and put a comment that you are interested as well, and we'll reach out to you.
Great.
Thanks,
Will do.
Alex.
Thank you.
Kate, you've got your hand up.
Hi, Ryan. Hi, Kirk. Thanks for the presentation. Apologies, I've missed a little bit. I come in a bit late, so you may have answered some of these questions, so my apologies. In terms of the insight reporting, I'm assuming that's going to be uplifted to support, obviously, this feature as well.
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. Okay. In terms of the saying scenario modeling, so can we do short-term and long-term scenario modeling with the prioritization and obviously optimization when it comes out? So if we're looking at a 5-year plan
Yes.
instead of just your current investment slate, that's correct. Yep,
Yes.
great.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
have a planning horizon, yeah.
Also, in terms of obviously we make changes, we get lessons learned as we go through our investment slate, and I assume the first time we all do this, we'll have lessons learned if we haven't been doing it manually to date, or we do it in the system. So in terms of trying to make enhancements year on year, is that something that we have to do? Obviously, just having a look at the settings that Ryan just went through there and going through obviously field by field, or can we export the template, make the config and upload? Is that a way to potentially do that?
But currently, there is no upload or download. You would do it in the system itself, Kate.
Okay.
But the configuration is in the settings. So what Ryan outlined in the demo is essentially what the user experience is. It allows you to maintain all of your settings and measurements.
Okay, lovely. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Alex, the last one as we come to the end of time.
Just to expand on that, the way we designed the settings was for it to be super easy to do and to set up, and to avoid to have to do that in Excel and then import it, just because many companies have different ways of doing prioritization, and so we wouldn't be able to match exactly any Excel spreadsheets, but we made sure that the user experience in the settings was easy enough as well. Yeah.
Okay, we have time. There's one more hand up. We rarely have time just for this one. Lizette?
Hello. Yeah, I'm just on the last point. I'm not sure. Maybe this is already explained, but is it possible to play different scenarios? So you've got your items that you're prioritizing, and you say, well, let's muck around with the weightings, and let's play the different scenarios against that set.
Just quickly, Lizette, that's part of the optimization. So what we refer to as the what-if scenario planning will enable you to plan different scenarios and compare them with each other.
But in terms of the prioritization, as this first release, that's simply you have one go at setting up your weightings, and that's it. And that's you configured it, and that's what you make your assessment with. Am I right?
Yeah, as part of the, so as part of the creation of the prioritization model, you definitely can apply existing initiatives to these new scenario models if you wanted to.
But the configuration of those weightings and the score, how the scores work with one another, you configure that once, and that's what you're playing against your. Okay, right. Okay, so scenarios is a future, capability that'll come with optimization.
That's spot on, exactly.
Okay, right. Thank you.
Okay, we are at the end of our time. Ellie, do you want to? I think you put the last poll up. Do you want to do any wrap up?
Yes. I would just like to let everyone know this session has been recorded, so will be sent out to you shortly along with the PowerPoint slides. Additionally, we do have upcoming webinars in April. It has yet to be fully furnished, but registration will be coming out soon. So if you could please give us some feedback on how valuable the session was, that would be amazing. Thank you. And that should wrap us up for today. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all very much. See you at the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.